Do you want to unlock your inner Jedi, blocking every attack coming towards you, including fall damage, whilst mercilessly slicing your foes in front of you in a massive cleave? Well then, my fun counter loadout for Zhin might very well be the one for you. So, Zhin, the new sword-wielding, merciless criminal overlord, has come out whirling his flame sword, and one of his abilities is called Counter, where it blocks attacks. Now, what's central to this build is retaliation. Normally, Zhin will only block one attack and slice out, doing 700 damage if somebody is close enough in front of him, but only one attack. Retaliation means that after countering attack, you keep countering attacks that come towards you, so you keep up your stance. What the idea of this loadout is getting right in people's faces, throwing yourself right into the action, and making people proc that retaliation, that counter, and try and slice and dice your way through enemies as you block all of their attacks, including ultimates and whatever the hell they want to throw at you, but only in front of you. Now, why is it a fun loadout? Well, I still feel that if you do go against somebody that susses you out, they can make your life very difficult, as a Zhin with the retaliation card. If people just ignore you and don't proc off your counter, then you're going to be in a little bit of trouble. But hey, let's whirl straight into the deck and just talk through what's currently going on. So this build is called Fun ? Counter, and you can find this if you go into Import Loadout and search Joshino on PC, and you can just import this loadout if you want to try it out. So the main thing in this loadout that's really important is Perfect Block 4. What this card does is means every successful counter. This doesn't mean if you hit an enemy, all you have to do is block an attack, so proc that swing, you will heal for 400 health. This just gives you that sustain. Most of the time, it will actually just get you to full if people do start shooting you. The other card that is quite important, at least for the moment, is Master Stance 4. This increases your counter by 1 second. Now, this whole build is built around that counter, so having it last for another second is usually enough for another attack to go off if they do proc everything. I was testing on the Cassie bots in the shooting area, and normally they hit off 3 attacks before it runs out, but with this extra second they can hit off 4 attacks to give you some idea on how much can go off with this Master Stance. The other 3 cards are kind of preference at the moment and maybe switched in or out due to your flavor. So the first one, successfully countering an attack, will generate 2 ammo. Now it's kind of putting all your eggs in one basket with hoping that somebody's going to hit your counter, and especially better players will just ignore you when you go into a counter build, but I'll also talk about some tips on trying to get people to hit your counter even if they don't want to. But this does kind of work out, and it's pretty high compared to all the other cards because all the other cards start off at 1, but this generates 2 ammo if you successfully counter an enemy. Because sometimes you'll come out of your counter, somebody will have procced your counter attack. Maybe you didn't have ammo when you went into the counter because using it as a last ditch save, and you can use these 2 ammo to finish somebody off. The next one is Blade Dance 2. What this does increases the distance of whirl by 30%. Now, I quite like the distance on the whirl because I think it's a great escape if you use it right and can get you in and out of fights pretty well. And also, it's probably the best tool on Zhin to chase down an enemy if they're really low. You spot somebody, you think, I'm getting over there, I'm going to whirl over there. And 30% just seems to help a little bit. The last one is Kindling 1, which is activating whirl generates 1 ammo. Again, I really like the whirl to finish people off, but sometimes you can misjudge it, and that 400 damage isn't enough to finish off an enemy when you get there with your whirl, and you'll need the extra shot to kill somebody, and especially if you don't have any ammo when you go into this whirl, this card, Kindling 1, is going to give you that. So that's the deck, and again, some of them can be changed out, especially the last 3. Maybe Master Stance could be switched out with something else as well. But generally, I think this kind of works in terms of being a counter-focused build. Again, it's a fun build. I don't necessarily think it's the best build out there, but it can do some interesting things. So who is this build good against? So who are you going to pick it up if you see an enemy team and maybe you want to take it a little bit more seriously? Well, any enemies that fire consistently in a beam or have automatic fire, but low damage each shot, but over time, are pretty good to go against because they might proc off the counter more times and maybe forced to try and engage and try and shoot around you a bit more. AoE damaged champions can just shoot behind you and just hit the AoE off, especially because the counter hitbox in front of you isn't very big. And some of the champions I think that it works really well against are Fernando, because his flamethrower, there's just like nothing you can do. If a Zhin uses retaliation in front of you, you can either fire and he'll start proccing off and hitting you back, or you can stop and wait, and then you'll be losing out on the damage you could have done before, and you kind of stopping and blocking the enemy's attack. Torvald can work, Victor can work, Tyra can work, Grok can work, basically just any of the ones that have a continuous attack. I do also think it can work quite well against two tanks that are stuck on the point and maybe clumped together, and you're coming in, you're in front of a Ruckus and a Makoa, they're both trying to hit you, they're both trying to get around you, and you're just countering them and stopping them on the point, not being able to do anything. So how exactly should you play this Zhin? Well, actually I kind of play him more as a brawler rather than an all-out flank. The thing is, an enemy's more likely to be able to take you on 1v1 in a duel. You don't have high damage, you don't have high DPS, people can just ignore your counter if you're 1v1, they're more likely to suss it out, and also people can just try and keep their distance from you. You still try and go around the flanks whenever you can, whenever there's not a clump up or a big fight, but a lot of the time you'll be going head first into a group of enemies. Honestly, there have been some amazing moments where I've gone in and everybody around me has been procking off that counter because there's tried to be a frantic hold on the point and everybody's just trying to shoot around me. But what you do as this counter Zhin is get in front of anybody's attacks. If somebody's trying to fire at somebody else or trying to ignore you, just get in front of them, make sure your retaliation goes off. A, you're stopping the enemy from really getting attacks off, and B, you're also getting damage out yourself. There's a lot of passive things that will proc off the counter as well, which can go up to and will make you do damage without them needing to fire at you. Things like barracks turrets which lock onto you. If you stand in front of those and the barracks still near them, you can keep swinging your sword around because the turret's projectiles will bounce off it and activate that counter. It's quite funny to go against the barrack, actually. One of the things that's interesting with the counter is it keeps you out of combat whilst you're using it, and even though counters are going off, as long as you don't take damage from behind. And what you can do is at the end of counter, use your billow, and once you go into your billow, you'll be almost at the point where you can heal up out of combat. So you'll start healing yourself, and even if nobody procs at counter, so you don't get any health back from your perfect block card, and also you're not hitting any enemies, if you go into that billow, then you'll be able to heal up during that out of combat time. The only thing at the moment is the counter has a weird animation stall between using the counter and being able to use an ability. So there's almost like 0.4, 0.5 seconds between using a counter and using your billow. So if you smash the Q button, you've just got to kind of hope that you'll go from your counter into your billow, but if you do, then you'll probably be able to heal up most of the way to full. Another thing that currently people do a lot is they don't realize that you have this counter build, that you have retaliation, and a lot of people's reaction to a Zhin putting up their sword is to fire at it to get rid of it so they can just keep on killing him. So that's one thing that's going for him at the moment. Now a lot of people think that you're taking the Smolder legendary card where you'll get the healing in your billow. The other thing that's a bit derpy and why Master Stance is also quite good is that the sound for counter stops before that 1 second extra that you get on the card. So people will think that the counter stopped, but actually you'll have another second to be able to get about one more attack counted off. That's just a bit sneaky to be honest, but at the moment that's how it works. Coming back to the brawl thing, another good thing about counter is if you're close enough and enemies are close enough, then you can hit multiple enemies with your swing, and it's 700 damage across the board. So if you're on a point fight where everyone's piling on because it's so close, people will be panicking, just trying to throw everything they can at the point, and what that'll mean is that you can swing around and chew people down to zero. With this build and deck, you're waiting a lot of the time until your counter is back up again, stalling your enemies until that can happen, and also juggling all of your other escapes and abilities in the in-between time. Now I always feel that if you don't have billow up, you should probably have whirl up to have an escape at chance, and vice versa. But like I mentioned before, often you'll be using the billow straight after the counter, especially if they didn't proc off any of the attacks and you didn't heal at all and you may be faced with some enemies. But just generally, I think the way you play Zhin is that if you kill somebody, you win a duel or you win a 1v1 or you finish somebody off, you'll be in between attacks. There's not really any chance to take somebody on face to face, especially another flanker or something like that, where their DPS is higher. And if they're going straight head to head with you without your counter up, you're going to struggle a lot. So you might use your billow anyway just to get away, heal up, and come back into the fight again, or just break up that fight and let all your other cooldowns come off. Because Zhin isn't very good at moving vertically anyway, you don't really want to be caught in a place where there's several layers of height. So for example on Bright Marsh, on one side there's 2 levels and a staircase. you kind of don't really want to flank around that side too often. You kind of want to stick to the houses that have small little corridors where you can counter pretty easily, and also your attacks will slash in pretty much the whole of the building, and also the flatter areas are just generally around the point room. Because not only do you find it hard to move around places with lots of vertical cover, a lot of enemies will find it easier to attack you from different directions if they're above you. And it'll make your life harder if you do have to use counter as a last ditch resort to try and survive and maybe heal up, as they'll find it easy to flank or shoot behind you or shoot to your side, or just avoid you altogether and not feed that counter. But when you're in a room or you're close up or you're outside in a flat plane, your enemies are more likely to accidentally shoot you or try to shoot an ally near you or something like that, because you're on just one plane and there's only one way for the enemy to shoot. I do also think that he is a bit situational on maps, and I think he does do a lot better, especially with this counter build, if the maps are tighter. So Brightmarsh has quite a few tight areas, but maps like Fish Market and Timber Mill don't really afford Zhin any chance to engage. I mean, Timber Mill has a lot of verticality, so with no vertical movement, Zhin is in trouble. But in Fish Market, the map is just so big that people are just going to ignore you completely and not try and proc your counter, and people will be brawling less often and grouped up. You see, Ice Mines is a long map, but actually, because the enemies are usually focused in one of the corridors and there's quite tight alleyways when you're fighting, it's not so bad for Zhin. And the point has quite a few areas that are covered on either side that are quite tight too, where you can get your counters off a little cheekily. This is also why I think Zhin does do a lot better on the Onslaught mode, where you're basically on smaller maps, there isn't so much verticality, or if there is, then you can pretty much go up it pretty easily. It's just one level. And I think he does quite well there, especially on Primal Court. Primal Court is very tight as a map, and you can come around a corner without people realizing you have counter up, and they'll shoot into it and proc it off once or twice. And often the point is so busy that you'll be able to get your counter off anyway, which is where Zhin really shines. And a lot of people will pick up Barrack, and Barrack is one of the people that will proc your counter every time. I mean, the Willow Seedlings could do it too, and a lot of other things, but Barrack is definitely one of the big ones. Anyway, that's pretty much the build and the tips I have for the moment. Just remember to generally play Zhin to the best of your abilities. Little tips like waiting until you have the 700 damage, maybe using the 2 original slashes, the first 2 slashes 450s, whilst you're looking around a corner, peering around a corner, and just taking pot shots, and then use that 2 seconds and that last shot, which is the charged up 700 damage, to start off the fight with an enemy that you definitely know you can hit first off, because then that can increase your DPS. Again, finishing people off with the whirl, getting in front of your allies and saving them with your counter. Being the White Knight definitely works out with Zhin. He is a team player, and counter to most of the flanks logic, he's actually pretty decent against tanks because you can just go into their faces or get in front of most of their attacks, because a lot of them have wide attacks. Even Inara has a bit of a spread on her projectiles, and things like Ashe are quite hard to fire past you with your counter going on right in their faces, and pretty much counters all of her abilities as well, so it's kind of funny to go against her. But again, playing it seriously, I'm not entirely sure whether it works, because good players will just ignore it and can pretty much render you quite useless. And the bottom line is, you have to create the opportunities, you have to make the counter happen, and to do that you need to be hyper aggressive. So the super aggressive Zhin is the Zhin that wins, well, with the counter build anyway. There are some things I'd like hi-rez to do with Zhin, which I don't think necessarily needs to be balancing in terms of DPS or damage or anything like that, just making it so that between the counter and the billow, there isn't a gap and there isn't that animation. Maybe also think about being able to come out of your counter once you've used it if you know you're definitely not going to get anything hit off. That could be something that comes onto the legendary just to let you have a bit more flexibility with your counter. Sometimes you do put it up and then you realize, oh wait, nobody's attacking me. I've wasted this counter. Let me get it on cooldown again, because the counter has to go on for the whole duration. That kind of increases your cooldown, which is why the card where you have it gets an extra second of counter has good and bad points. And generally just between firing, the animation between your fire and your counter can be a bit buggy, and between billow and counter. If everything was just seamless, I think that would make Zhin a lot more fun to play and less frustrating at times, which he can be if you're almost certain your ability went off, but then it just doesn't come up, or you die before your ability goes off. Actually, sometimes that happens with Androxus as well, where you put your reversal up, but actually it wasn't up in time, and it's more of a ping issue, but maybe that just needs some lag compensation going on there. Maybe Zhin needs an early lag compensation fix. Anyway, what does everybody else think about this deck? Would you change anything about it? Again, I would say it's more of a fun deck than a serious deck, but it will work better the more casual the matches you play, and if players are less accustomed to playing against Zhin, and if they are going to be taken by surprise. But be sure to let me know in the comment section below your thoughts. Like if you enjoyed the video, dislike if you didn't, subscribe for more of our content, and I'll see you all next time. Thanks for watching, Joshino.